Hey there, it is Tomster on the behalf of Indie Structural Productions once again, and we are going to be doing a sort of painting tutorial on how to go from this into something completely different. And here's the end result that we're gonna go for. Now, if there's a certain thing that you want answers to pretty much immediately and you don't want to hear me blabber on and go through the entire thing, just check the chapter markers down in the description and those will tell you the different parts of this entire process. So if you want to know more about what it's like to go from the first layers of paint to clear coat, or if you want to look at scuff sanding and stuff like that, then you can skip right on ahead to those parts of the video. That's completely fine with me. But if you want to watch the entire video, I do urge you to do so because I'm just going to be going through my entire sort of method on how I approach these things. All right, so we are good to go and paint. Everything is set up. I have the hook to hang my body and I have the neck all masked up. So first and foremost, you're gonna need gloves. You're of course gonna need your paint, but this is the most important thing, mask. I'm gonna try and do commentary live while I'm actually painting this time around because previously I made the tutorial, the homebrew, I did so that I explained everything that I'm gonna do prior to actually painting and then painted, but let's see if I can actually do both at the same time. If you can't understand or hear me, I am going to add some subtitles so that you'll be able to make out what I say when I say things. Yeah, so on to the spray booth. I am going to be using Maston spray paints just because I love the stuff. They have a really good tip. It always makes like a nice fan, so it makes painting a lot easier. And it's also very cheap, which is really a nice factor. It's cheap, it's good quality. Why not use it? All right, let's head to the quote-unquote spray booth. Okay, so first off, a couple of handy things to keep in mind is first, have a very well ventilated area, have a mask, and then before starting to spray, check that you have a good flow. Because if your paint is splattering, that's going to cause some issues if you go straight to your workable material. Now, usually, doing a neck, you would kind of do it like this, it's hanging up and whatnot. But because I can't really hang this up, I am going to show you how you can get around that. So, little by little, don't put too much paint on at first because that'll drip. It's better to kind of put light layers and work up from there. So, okay. And always start from a movement and never start on your piece, okay? And always overlapping layers. Your first covering doesn't need to be all that thorough because you're going to be putting small incremental layers at a time. And then I'm going to start doing trying to think of the best way to do this really. Okay, so there's my first initial layer. It doesn't look like much, but the actual color will start to build up pretty well. Now, for the body, usually always start from the edges and then do the flat surfaces. And usually it's a good idea, or what I've been taught and what I've been doing, is starting from this edge and then starting with the motion. Always follow the curve of the guitar. Like so. Now to do the inside scoops.
and always starting with a movement. Like even there, I brought it in from the side. All right, now, to make your life easier, just hang up the guitar like this. And now you'll be able to see the sort of layers. So you have your fan going like this, and you're kind of overlapping half of that fan at each pass. Just fairly light layers at this stage. Don't worry that you're not getting a full coverage. You're going to be doing a few layers on your first go around. I usually tend to, per session, I do 3 layers at a time. But the first initial layers that I do 4, sometimes maybe even 5. All right. It doesn't look like much, but when we come to do the second layer, you're going to see a big difference. All right. So I'm going to let that dry for about half an hour now, and then come back after that to do the next layer. Okay, now I'm going to try a little bit of a different approach for the neck. So I'm going to set this down real quick so I don't get any overspray on that. As you can see, the paint already has a much better surface to kind of grab onto. And it's going on a little bit smoother than before. There. And now to do the heel separately. There. Try to avoid spot fixing. I just did a little bit on there, but you should try to avoid that, just so that you don't get too much paint on whatever you're painting and run the risk of getting drips or drip marks. All right, now the body. Same process as last time, except this time we're getting a much better coat on there. So starting from the back and starting from a movement and following the curve of the guitar. Like so. Doing the other side. There. Inside scoops. A little bit of a better angle on there. There. Once again, doing the flat surfaces. I'm getting a little bit of a splatter, so I don't think this is mixed all that well. So let's try it now. And the other side. Huh. There we go. I don't know what's up with my spray can, but there. All right, so that's the second layer done. I had some issues with this, but it also could be that it's a bit cold outside and this isn't that well mixed. But yeah, we got a nice even layer on there. We're gonna do 1 or 2 more layers. So now I'm gonna wait another half an hour to 20 minutes before I do the next one. All right, boys and girls, we're ready for our last coat of, or our last initial coat of paint. And it's not any different than the previous one that we did. We're just going to reinforce the work that we've already done. So, there you go. Here we are. That's the neck. Now for the last part of the body. Once again, same procedure as last time. So, with the movement, the other side, and the cutaways. And the front. There. That's pretty much that for this time around. So the next part we're going to do, we're going to go and do some scuff sanding with some wet and dry sandpaper to get the surface ready for the next few layers. And we're going to keep on doing this. We're probably going to do about, the minimum I'd say is 3 sessions. So that's 3 sessions of 3 layers is the minimum that we're going to do before moving on to clear coat. So let's see how we get on with scuff sanding this.
Okay, so now the first session of paint is done, and we are going to do what is called scuff sanding. And with scuff sanding, you are basically, well, as per the name, you're scuffing up the surface just so that you have a little bit better contact for your next layer of paint. At this stage, you will want to use some wet and dry sandpaper, and I would recommend using like 400, 600 is nice. You don't need to worry about too much. You can use 400 grit, but 600 is usually what I go for. Well, I am out of 600, so I'm going to be doing this with 800 grit. Doesn't really matter, it's just going to take a little bit more time. Now, what you want to do is you want to have some water, you want to have your paper. For flat surfaces, you want to have a sanding block, maybe a couple of different ones. The reason why this says no is because this side is not flat, this side is. And then some tissue paper to clean things up as you go. So, starting off, and then just moving with little circles, don't apply too much pressure. And the thing is, with scuff sanding, or wet sanding in general, on paint jobs and stuff, you'll be able to feel and hear the difference. Like there, you can hear that it is a bit smoother already in comparison to that. All right? Always remember to clean things up so you can actually see what you're doing. Now the aim here is not to get a flat surface just yet, because you need to build up your paint job. Right now you're just working to get a sort of contact point for the next session of paint that you're going to be doing. Now I should point out that when you're doing scuff sanding, especially in the first layers or so, you don't need to worry about going through because you're going to be adding more paint. So if you do go through, don't worry about it, don't stress about it too much. You're going to be building up the layers as you go. At this stage, of course, you want to avoid going through as much as possible, but if you do, don't stress about it too much. I usually like to work in quarters. So here, there, there, and there. And also using a block helps you eliminate the risk of going through. Now, you can already see that right here, it was a bit thinner. So that's where I need to concentrate on not going through in the future. But once again, not that bad if you do at this stage, because it is the first initial layer of paint. To get a good professional finish, the key ingredient is basically repetition. I have also learned that basically if you're trying to be too careful about doing things, that's usually when you end up making a little bit more mistakes. Don't be afraid to, even at this stage, to go through, because then you'll be working toward getting things flat and, you know, getting the hang of it. It's better to kind of like work through the processes, get yourself feeling comfortable with what you're doing, and then move on to the next stages. Okay, then the back. All right, now hopefully you'll be able to see the difference. And don't apply downwards pressure at all. Let the sandpaper do the work. Fortunately, this has gone on pretty well. It looks like I've managed to get it pretty consistent all the way through. So getting it flat will not be an issue later on. I'm gonna need to switch over to a smaller block. Now for scoops and carves and stuff like that, if it feels like you're not getting, or if it looks like it's not really a flat surface, you can fold up your sandpaper so that it's tool, so threefold, and then use the flats of your fingers to do the same job. But once again, really not applying any pressure at all. I'm letting the sandpaper do all the work. If you do sand with your fingers like this, be very, very careful, because you're at a higher risk of going out of flat and actually putting waves into your paint job. So I mostly reserve finger sanding to the neck that has a curve, and anything that isn't really a flat surface that you can get a block onto. Okay, so that is the body now scuffed up. As you can see, it isn't completely flat, and that's not what we're aiming for, but it is uniform enough for the next layers of paint to stick a little bit better. All right, now we're gonna move on to the neck, which is a little bit different. Now for the flat of the neck, like the back of the headstock and the heel and everything else, we'll do the same way with just using a block, but a block will not work on the carve almost at all because, well, it's a carve. I should say it's a curve. So we're gonna go back to using the flats of our fingers and then moving along the neck like this. I'm gonna give you a better angle of that. Once again, as with the body, and in general, wet sanding, I'm applying almost no pressure at all to the sandpaper because I don't plan on going through at all. Small circles, same technique as used before, and you can hear and feel when you've gotten rid of that sort of burr of the previous layer of paint. Just easy does it. Once again, don't worry about taking off too much and being overly careful about this. If you go through, you go through. At this point, it is the first layer of paint, so you're not that much in trouble. And yes, I'm repeating a lot of the things because this is essentially what finishing is all about. You're repeating processes until you get to the final product that you're happy with. And then when you do, then there's a couple of things that you have to do a little bit differently in regards to wet and dry paper and how you sand things. Yeah. In general, scuff sanding is a rather quick process. Sides of the headstock, same way that you would kind of sand the sides of the headstock in general. So instead of using the flats of your fingers, I'm using the tips of my fingers. because the side of the headstock, if I'm just going to use the flat of my finger, it is going to go over and it's going to break that edge. And that is something that I do not want at this point. Oh, speaking of edge. So the one thing that you want to steer clear of when you're doing scuff sanding and everything else, and especially when you're doing flat sanding, is edges, because they will break through like that. And if you keep on focusing on that, you're just going to make it worse. Edges will need a bit more paint or clear coat or whatever you're putting on, and it is completely fine to let it kind of build up. In fact, that's kind of what you want to do before you start going anywhere near it. Yep, and then the back of the headstock is just this simple. And there we have it. We have scuff sanded the entire guitar, the body and the neck. And clean off all the water, make sure that it's nice and dry, and then we're ready to go and spray on the next session of paint. Let's go do that now.
All right, so the second session of paint, and I apologize for the noise in the background. There is a playground literally like right there. This stage doesn't differ almost at all to the previous one. I've already mentioned many times before, repetition, repetition, repetition. And this is exactly what is going to be happening from now onwards up until we start doing clear coats. Within this one session, I'm going to do 3 layers in between half-an-hour increments. So 1 layer, then I'm going to wait half an hour or 20 minutes, and then move on to the next layer, another 20 minutes to half an hour, and then the last one. So yeah, here we go. It's a little bit colder today than it was during the first layer, so I'm hoping that doesn't screw up my finish. Let's hope for the best, shall we? Once again, same process is always make sure that there's no dust left on your paint or on the surface that you're going to paint. You don't want any of that getting trapped in, because that will make your surface uneven. Once again, we're doing just very light layers. We don't want to pile on too much so it doesn't drip. That's the second layer done, and now we're going to wait another half an hour. I don't know why I looked at my wrist, I don't have a watch, but wait half an hour and come back for the next one. And that's the second layer done. The third layer is going to be exactly the same as the first two, so I don't really see any point in me showing you how to do that because you've already seen it a few times. So tomorrow I'm going to be scuff sanding this again, and then we're going to do another session, and that will be the third session of paint, and usually that is the minimum that I will do. So we'll see how things go tomorrow.
All right, so the second layer of paint is now done. And we're gonna get to wet sanding again. This time around, I went and got myself some 600 wet and dry. And it is gonna be exactly the same process as last time. So, working in sort of quadrants and doing little circles. And very lightly, I don't need to push down almost at all. Just need to scuff up the surface enough for the next layer of paint. Just realized I don't have any paper. Now, already starting to get a pretty good finish, or a pretty good layer on here. Now, like I said, the minimum I would do is 3 sessions. So 3 paint sessions consisting of 3 layers of paint is the minimum I would go for. But honestly, this already, like, this is the last layer that I did, and it isn't that bad at all. I should show you a close-up so you can actually tell what I'm talking about. I mean, it's still wet from the water there, but basically the 600 is just scuffing up the surface enough for the next layer of paint to kind of attach a bit better. Essentially what I'm doing is just I'm getting rid of the little bit of sheen that you would have if you had a nice flat surface. Now, this part hasn't been touched at all with sandpaper yet. So this is straight off of the spray, and it is very, very nice and smooth. So it's not really all that much effort to do this properly. Just repetition, and I guess for first timers doing this, you'll start noticing that there's a certain type of pressure that you're going to be using when you're sanding. None, basically, but there's a certain feel to the sandpaper and the way that you sand. And the way that you figure that out is just basically learning by doing it a whole bunch. So again, it's still, if you're going through, don't worry. It's perfectly normal to do that, especially when you're first starting out and learning how to do finishing and spray finishing, especially at home. Then for the curved surfaces, I'm gonna be, again, just folding my paper 3-fold so that I have a workable tool. And using the flats of my fingers very carefully, coming up to the edge. There we go, then the sides of the body. And using a block on the side of your body is actually rather important because it will ensure that you don't really go over the edge, because they are very fragile and have a tendency of, well, you might have a very strong likelihood of going through on the edges if you don't do it in this way. So using a block on all flat areas is pretty much essential. So yeah, this part really is not any different from the previous time that we've done it. Except now we're doing it with the 600 grit like we should have done from the get-go. Now, in reality, you'll see that, well, a lot of people might talk about needing to use 400 grit for this stage. And yes, you can. Definitely, it is very possible for you to use 400 grit. And some paint manufacturers even said that you should use 400 grit for this stage. But I like the little extra assurance that I won't go through. Because let's face it, you're not taking away huge amounts of material. All you need to do is to get the surface somewhat roughed up, so to speak, for the paint to stick. So 600, 800, it's not gonna, affect that in a major way. The only thing that it's affecting is the fact that you won't go through as easily as you would with 400 grit. So a higher grit paper, and you're less likely and less prone to go through the paint that you've, spent a long time doing properly. If that made any sense. Flats of the neck and headstock, easy enough, once again with a block, so that you can avoid breaking edges, like so. And then the neck itself, fold it over 3 times, and once again using the flat of your finger or flats of your fingers and little circles. Remember to constantly keep on wiping away the excess water and residue left over from sanding to see what exactly you are doing. Sides of the headstock I'm doing with the tips of my fingers so that I won't go over and break the edge. Because if I can, I will have this be the last layer of paint that I do before clear. And by the way things are going, it looks like a very strong possibility of doing so. All right, well, these have now been sanded down, scuff sanded with 600 grit, and I am gonna go and do, hopefully, the last layers of paint. And that means that tomorrow we'll be able to come back and do clear coats. I'm gonna be using Maston, once again, Maston 1 satin clear coat to get a nice finish on these. All right, I'm gonna go spray. It's gonna be the exact same process that I've already done twice before, so I'm not gonna bother you with the details. Instead, I'm just gonna go and do it. All right, so originally this video was gonna be a single part video, but I got to this point and it's already about 40 minutes. Thank you for sticking around and watching this video up until this point. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you'll actually see next week's video. Click that bell notification so you'll actually get, well, bell icon, so you'll actually get the notification when that video comes live. And like this video. And comment down below if you have something to comment on. But hey, see you guys next week, and we'll continue onwards with this, and I will doing clear coats. All right, see you guys.